Good morning. Thank you for tuning into the Maine Menu. I am your host, Michelle Wakem, and I hope you're all starting your day off great. I know my day is starting off pretty great. I have a guest today joining me. He is an author, a longtime resident of Maine. He wrote a fiction called Summer to Fall, and I'd like to welcome him to the show. Albert Waite, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
First of all, if you could please tell me about yourself.
Well, I'm a middle-aged white guy who happens to be a writer, living in Kennebunkport for the last 12 years. But when I was a kid, my folks had a summer business up here. I fried a lot of clams in my youth. Bounced around, went to Bates College, lived out in California for a few years, moved back, lived in Boston for quite a while, and moved up to Maine about 12 years ago. I went to the creative writing program at Boston University to hone my skills. But, my novel Summer to Fall is basically 8 or 9 years' work. It's set in Maine, in a small town, very similar to Kennebunkport. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people will recognize some of the landmarks.
Absolutely, I know I did, yeah.
And that's where we're at. Writing, I've had a lot of luck with short stories. This is my first novel. Mm-hmm. So kind of wading into new and unexpectedly deeper waters here.
So what's the response that you've been getting from the people that have read your book?
People have really liked it. Mm-hmm. I find it hard to believe that someone is going to come up and say, I've read your book and it stinks. But people have been really positive. They found characters that they can relate to. Mm-hmm. They've recognized a lot of the main character values and atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. That small town feeling.
Yeah, it's very much a Maine book, and I think people have really enjoyed that, both people from here and people from elsewhere as well.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. After reading the book, the characters are very relatable. The main character being Cam Preston. You definitely describe, the feeling and emotion in this book and all his triumphs and tribulations very well. You really do. You feel for what he goes through. So I think you did a really good job with the characters that you placed in this book.
Well, thank you.
You had mentioned being a graduate from Bates College. What was your major?
I was a sociology major at Bates.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
And that's given me a really pretty good insight into how society functions. Mm-hmm. I was interested in writing even back then, but there were very limited creative writing opportunities. The English department, not a bad thing, was heavily into the classics, mm-hmm. Which I was not. Mm-hmm. I was more of a punk rock guy and into like contemporary fiction. Mm-hmm. And really at the time didn't have the patience or maturity to sit through like left-handed authors of the 18th century kind of classes. Mm-hmm. So I was interested in sociology, but back then my creative pursuits were spent, writing songs and goofing around and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's part of it, right? That's part of our experiences.
Right.
Absolutely. So is writing something you always wanted to do, or how did all that come about, being a sociology major?
Well, I can remember back as far as third grade, we had a creative writing exercise every day. Mm-hmm. And outside of recess, that was pretty much my favorite part of the day. Mm-hmm. When I moved to California after I graduated, a friend and I started writing a screenplay, still unfinished. But I've always had an interest in it. I was writing songs and things like that. When I moved back to Boston in 1988, I hooked up with some writers, and they recommended for me to start taking some classes at Harvard Extension School, mm-hmm. which has Harvard professors teaching people of the community Harvard curriculum classes. So I took some intermediate classes and started to get into some more advanced short story classes. And I hooked up with a writer there, Tom Bailey, who was teaching the class. He was on staff at Harvard, who's a tremendous writer. And he kind of took me under his wing and mentored me and, would work with me outside of class as well. And he suggested, if you want to be published, if you want to be a writer, you need to go to a writing program. So he helped me get my work in order. A lot of the applications to these programs are based on your creative work. He worked with me. I got into Boston University, which is one of the top programs in the country.
Excellent.
And I was in Boston, so that's where I went.
Nice.
And it was really an intense period. Did a lot of writing. I had some great instructors, Leslie Epstein, Ralph Lambrellia, Ligor Goodman. And I was with a really good group. They only take 10 writers a year. And so the group that I worked with, fantastic bunch of writers, Chris Castellani, Kristen Duesberg, Michelle Chalfoun, all just great writers, and really had a blast learning and honing my craft there. Some of the short stories I wrote for the program there went on to get published.
Nice.
But at that time, I had no interest in taking on a novel. That came later, I guess, with a little more maturity and the wisdom that comes with age.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you had a really good experience, though, working with these people, and they really, became that foundation for that you needed to write this book.
Right.
So
it was
a stepping stone.
It was great. It took me a long time in life to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. But once I did, I was lucky enough to get in the right places with the right people.
Absolutely.
That I could really grow as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people take the rest of their lives not knowing, so that you found your niche, so that's really wonderful. What's the earliest memory that you have of writing a story, and was it from that moment on that you knew that you wanted to do something like this, or was it something, like you said, that came later in life?
I can still remember some of the third grade exercises we did. But I wrote for the class at Bates. There was one fiction writing class. I don't think I ever finished a story.
Oh, really?
The professor was more interested in just writing well than getting a complete story.
Okay.
It wasn't probably until I was living in Boston in '88. I moved to Boston and was bartending, and I finished a story, which I haven't looked at in quite a while, but I imagine is really pretty bad.
You think so?
I do. Even when I started taking classes, some of those stories, I can look back on now and just cringe and kind of laugh at how bad they were. I had a long way to go to really get my feet under me as a writer. But, the journey is part of it, too.
Absolutely, and it must be interesting to look back at your earlier writings and kind of see how you've improved over time, and, as you became more experienced in writing, how your writing probably has changed over the years as well.
Oh, yeah. I can still remember advice from Tom Bailey at Harvard, who wrote "Where's the tension?" on top of one of my papers, one of my stories. So anytime I'm writing, I'm thinking about tension. And
what is the tension? Just kind of.
Well, the conflict
Okay.
that you need. The character. Aristotle said we are our desires. So every character has their desires, and it's what they have to go through to get them that makes literature interesting and makes those characters
I like that. Yeah.
interesting.
Okay.
And Leslie Epstein, my last story I wrote for him, said, above all, think of pace. I'm going to drop another writer here. Tolstoy said, conciseness is the sister of talent. So the smoother and quicker you can deliver the story with less words and just what really matters, the more it's going to impact the reader. So those are the things I work on while I write and think about: tension and conciseness.
Well, I definitely felt both of those things in your novel, Summer to Fall. You want to talk to us a little bit about your novel and some of the characters, maybe how you came about these characters?
Sure.
The small towns.
As I said, I spent a lot of time in Kennebunkport. So the setting for the novel is a small town. I call it Laurel. Very similar to Kennebunkport. The main character, as you mentioned, Cam Preston, he's 25. He's an English major graduate of UNH, which in itself isn't a problem, except that his parents see that as an extended summer vacation for 4 years since he's graduated, and his girlfriend finds him on a path that is going to, she's projecting him out as one of those guys who do nothing but work and drink beer, which is not always a bad thing, but not a high career goal in her eyes. He's living in his grandmother's beach house, and she has recently passed away. And as is going on in the town of Kennebunkport right now, seaside values of real estate are through the roof. His family sees that the house is worth more than they can afford with the taxes, and his parents are nearing retirement age. So they decide to put up the house for sale. And you see a lot of that right now. A lot of the old houses, and when I first moved to Kennebunkport, it was a fishing village. Now it's kind of a Tony retreat. Whether that's a bad or a good thing is another debate.
Right.
But this is the footing that Cam finds himself in. His parents and uncle decide they're going to sell the house. He makes a bid to buy it, but he is undercut by some big money comes in, and that's what we're seeing. So some of the families that have always lived there are having a hard time staying there.
Right.
So he's cast out on his own, partly by his choice. The other two characters that are at the heart of the book are Sophia Harding. She's an almost 30-ish trust fund supported artist. She's a painter. And the other character is Jeremy Riley, who is her ex-boyfriend that a recent breakup has split them. And he's the town's local hero, pretty boy bartender who everybody loves. And while Sophia and Jeremy were together, they often entertain the idea of opening a restaurant with him as the brains and know-how and her as the money. And as a result of what happens in the book, she gets a vision of turning this abandoned bait shed on the town pier into the fine dining restaurant that they envision together. And that's all well and good, except when they go to put the plan in motion, her father cuts back their budget, as he is a more realistic businessman. And the only one willing to take on the job is Cam, who is young, hungry, and has something to prove, not only to his parents and the people around him, but to himself.
Absolutely.
So that's the real heart of the story, without giving too much of it away.
Yes, I don't want to give too much away.
You can find that all on the back cover. So I didn't think I was going overboard there.
No, that was great. So what was your motivation or inspiration for writing this novel?
Well, I'm very connected to the setting, as are my characters are all transplants as well. There's something, in this area, whether it's Biddeford Pool or Kennebunkport and Goose Rocks or Cape Porpoise or Gunkwit, that draws people here.
Right.
And when you combine that with how people, the people, how they see themselves and what they want to be is not always who they are. And it's always a challenge for people to try to become who they want to be. And there's always a gap between how they see themselves and how they can get there and who they want to be. And I found that characters in this setting and at that particular age, that's a real challenge for them, and it's a real part of their growth and self-discovery.
Sure.
So I kind of jumped right in there.
Wonderful. My next question is, what's the writing process like for you, and what's your favorite part of writing?
That's a great question. My writing process is slow and tedious.
Yeah.
And
slow and steady.
Yeah, slow and steady. You have to. I'm a distance runner, and I learned early in my high school career that if you want to be good, you have to run every day. So you kind of have to approach writing that same way. You can't wait till you feel the inspiration, because you might never feel it. But you need to sit down and write every day, and once you do, you don't know what's going to happen. You might not feel like writing, and you sit down, and you might have a great day. But unless you sit down and go at it, you don't know.
You never know.
And nothing can get done.
Right.
I'm really bad at rough drafts. That's the hardest part for me, is getting the original, whether it's a story or a chapter or even a scene. Like getting through that first part of it and just getting it complete is real difficult for me. I rewrite a lot. I need to, because my rough drafts are so bad. But I really enjoy revision, and when I start out with a vision of how I want, once I read that first draft, I can usually see what needs to happen and what I need to fix, and usually it's quite a bit.
Really? Now, are you someone that walks around with maybe a notebook, or you have like a little pad that if you do have an idea, you jot it down so you don't forget? Or
I
do you
do.
kind of just keep a mental
I don't walk around with
pad of paper?
a pad of paper, but part of that incubation process in the creative process, when your mind's elsewhere, your subconscious is working on it. And I'll come in from a run as a distance runner and like run to the note paper, because I'll have thought of something, I want to get it down before I forget it. Or if I'm out, or if I'm bartending, I'll be scribbling things on cocktail napkins. And people will be looking at me, and I'll say, nothing going on here. But yeah, the ideas come in fits and spurts, and you got to take them while you can get them.
Absolutely.
Some of it is planned, but other things come to you. Like I started writing this book probably 8 years ago. I worked on it for 3 years. Got some feedback from some very good agents, and I really couldn't get a grip on how to fix the things that were wrong with it. So I took 2 years and went back to writing short stories. And in those 2 years, things would come to me every now and then, because I was always in the back of my mind thinking about the novel. And after 2 years of writing short stories, I had it in my head of what I needed to fix, how I needed to fix it, how my approach needed to be different. But it was 2 years of incubation while doing other things that really put me on the right path, that allowed me to complete the book as I saw it.
Well, sometimes taking a break from something is the best thing, too.
Absolutely.
Kind of give it a little break for a little while and then pick it up a little bit later on. It tends to flow a little easier.
You're absolutely right.
How does your personal experience affect your writing, or does it at all?
It does.
Does it?
In the classes I teach, we always have a discussion. The world according to Garp is really the world according to John Irving, filtered through Garp. So some of my worldview does seep in into the characters, into the setting, but it's an organic process.
Okay.
As a writer, you don't want to be speaking through your characters. You want them to have their own voice. You want them to see the town through their own eyes, not through your eyes. So I try to keep my distance.
Is that difficult to do?
It is. I kind of see it as method acting. When you're writing from, say, Cam's perspective, he's a 25-year-old. I'm now a little over 50. So his perception is going to be different than my perception. And it's really important to remember that. So you don't want yourself plastered over the characters. You want to let them live their own lives.
Have their own personalities
Right.
and whatnot. Well, that makes sense.
And some characters are, based on people, but you take a snippet of a character from somebody, and another piece from somebody else, and make them a real character.
Okay. Interesting. Now, do you sometimes have more than one piece of work going on at a time, or does that complicate things when you have more than one writing piece going on?
It complicates things for me.
Yeah.
If I think of a story idea, I'll start it, I'll write that first paragraph, and then put it away and try and finish what I'm working on.
Oh, okay.
So I have a few short story ideas that are sitting around right now that I haven't really got into yet, but I do have another novel underway since I completed this one.
Really?
And it's fairly different than this. So that's waiting. I've been thinking about how to fix that and had some great ideas, and I'm looking forward to getting into that a little more and a little more deeply and try and get that finished as well.
Does that one have a title or not? Or is that the first?
It does
one?
have a title.
It does have a title. Would you mind
Sure.
sharing?
It's called The Ruins of Woodman's Village.
And would be another would that take place in Maine as well? Or?
It does take place in Maine,
Oh,
but a little
fabulous.
more to the interior.
Okay.
With Laurel does come up in it. There aren't any of the same characters, but some of the same setting is used, and it's a different type of book. It's more of a kind of an existential mystery.
That would be great. I'll definitely look out for that one when it comes out. So what kind of books do you enjoy reading when you have time to read?
It's funny, when I read to learn as a writer.
Okay.
So I read classics and I read contemporary authors. I read for fun. I love Richard Russo and John Irving. I just read Beautiful Ruins by Jess Walter, which was just awesome. And it shows, I think my book is great, but it shows me that I have further to go. And there's higher peaks to reach. I love Fitzgerald. And probably the biggest influence on me as a writer was Henry Miller. When he is writing on and in concrete language, he's fantastic. But I started reading him in high school, and one of my friends threw Tropic of Cancer at me, and he's like, "You've got to read this book." And it wasn't just like the sexy parts, but his world, Henry Miller's worldview was he was going to write, and he didn't care about anything else, and he didn't care if he was poor, but he wanted to write, and he saw an alternative to the 9-to-5 world that I was facing as a high school, college, work for an insurance company. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Plenty of my friends do. I have a ton of friends who are lawyers, who have MBAs, who have taken a more traditional path, and that's great for them. But as soon as I connected with his Henry Miller stuff and all his writing, and I saw it, I don't have to take the conventional route. I can kind of do my own thing.
Absolutely.
And if I'm not selling 1 million copies, that's all right. Henry Miller didn't get published until he was older than 40.
Oh, wow.
And he kind of lived a parallel universe. While Hemingway and Fitzgerald spent a lot of time in Paris in the literary circles and kind of high society, Henry Miller was over there, and he was living hand to mouth, poor and destitute.
Interesting.
Not that I've ever been a starving artist, but it's something I can relate to. I have a lot of friends that make more money than I do, but you have to be who you are.
Right, as long as you're happy, and I think if you can do something that you love, why not? Why not
Exactly.
do it? Why not? Well, you might have answered this in the question I just asked you, but I was going to ask if there was any author out there that you could work with or have the chance to work with, who would it be?
Well, it'd definitely be, if I could have like a dinner.
Or maybe just work together and create something new, or in general, if there's any author that you could work with.
Well, it would have been Henry Miller for sure, because it would have been a wild ride.
Yeah.
But today, there's writers that I admire, like Russo and John Irving, and A Star Called Henry by Roddy Doyle. I just think is fantastic. And I wouldn't necessarily want to sit down and work with any of them, but just what I get from reading them is really encouraging and kind of inspiring.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close the show?
Well, Summer to Fall is available locally in Biddeford. You can get it at None Such Books, at Elements. You can get it at Kenny Books in Kennebunkport, or actually Kennebunk. It's Saxony in Kennebunk. Longfellow's in Portland. And of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all that.
Wonderful.
But go local.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the show. It's been a pleasure having you. And it'd be great to have you again once you complete your other novel. It'd be great to have you back and talk about that.
Sure. I think all my hair might be gray by that point. But,
That's okay.
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, it's been great. Thanks, Al.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much. And for everyone at home, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's interview, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.